Hey everybody. Today I'm so excited to talk about one of my favorite books in the Bible, and that is the book of Acts. The book of Acts is such an important book of the New Testament. Written by Luke around AD 63, Acts tells us how the church began and how it expanded following Jesus' ascension back to heaven. We get to see how the apostles and the early believers will live and respond to the Great Commission that Jesus gave just before he left. It picks up right where the Gospel of Luke left off. And Acts isn't just a history book, though, as there is much that we can learn and should learn from how the early church began and functioned. So let's walk through it a little bit. Starting in chapter 1, we see that Jesus is still here, he's with his disciples, and he leaves them with a few final words. In verse 8, he leaves them with a powerful promise. He says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." These last words of Jesus act as a theme for the rest of the entire book. Following this, we see the apostles head back to Jerusalem to wait for the Holy Spirit before they begin their ministry that will ultimately take them from Jerusalem to the ends of the earth, just like Jesus said. It's impossible to read through this book and not see the overwhelming work of the Holy Spirit. Every single page you flip to, there's going to be something that the Holy Spirit's doing. Someone said that this book should be called Acts of the Holy Spirit instead of Acts of the Apostles. And I want to show you how the Spirit was at work in the lives of these disciples so that you see why we need his empowerment today, just as they did. So let's look at the role of the Holy Spirit in the book of Acts. So in Acts 2, following Jesus' promise, on the day of Pentecost, all who had been gathered together in the upper room seeking the Lord were filled with the Holy Spirit. This was accompanied by the signs of tongues of fire, a mighty rushing wind, and the speaking in unknown languages. There are three other specific instances where we see a group filled or baptized in the Holy Spirit. In Acts 8, we see a group of Samaritans are filled. In Acts 10, a group of Gentiles are filled, and they begin speaking in tongues and praising God. And in Acts 19, some disciples at Ephesus are filled, and they also begin speaking in tongues and prophesying. But the baptism wasn't just about these cool signs that happened, but it was for empowerment to be his witnesses, just like Jesus had said back in Acts 1, verse 8. So back to Pentecost in Acts 2. Following the baptism, we see Peter filled with boldness, and he gives a powerful sermon that leads to 3,000 people repenting and being baptized. That would be awesome. This marked the beginning of the church. There's so much in the book of Acts, but briefly I just want to show you a few more places where we see the early believers doing some amazing things, all because of Spirit empowerment. In Acts 3, we see Peter and John. They tell a lame man to walk, and he leaps up off of his mat. Later, we see Peter and John stand before the Sanhedrin court and boldly proclaim the gospel, despite what it may cost them. And when it leads to them being beaten, they begin to worship God and thank him that they are worthy to suffer for his name. Wow, I want to respond like that if I ever suffer for Christ in that way. We see a man named Stephen, and he is filled with the Spirit and is empowered to become the first martyr. And then he asks the Lord to forgive his murderers in the same way that Jesus had done before. In Acts 9, Saul is converted. He's filled with the Spirit, and immediately he begins boldly preaching the gospel everywhere. He just goes everywhere. We see dead bodies are raised to life. Prison chains were broken. Countless miracles were being performed. And the gospel began to spread from Jerusalem to Judea, to Asia, to Greece, and to Rome, with the Spirit leading and telling the disciples where to go next. I want to be a part of something like that. I want to be a part of a movement like that. There's so many amazing things that happen in the book of Acts. and they were all a result of the work of the Holy Spirit. And I think I can speak for all of us and say that we want these things in our church today too. And thankfully, like Peter said in Acts 2, the promise is for all who are far off, and for our children and our children's children. What I think is most amazing about the Holy Spirit's empowerment, though, is the boldness that it gives to the early disciples that ultimately led to many of them were beaten, imprisoned, and ultimately died for the sake of the gospel. This is what true Spirit empowerment looks like, and it is what we need in our church today.